Hello everyone, this is Food is a Conversation Alumni Edition, session 46. So what are these conversations about till I'm waiting for my guest today? We are introducing our ecosystem members who attended any of the educational programs organized by the Future Food Institute. Let it be the Food Innovation Master Program I myself graduated from in 2018, or the Food and Climate Shaper Bootcamps. What we actually currently running, the second edition of the digital bootcamp is kicked off on the 20th of November with 44 new soon-to-be food and climate shapers. So this morning I actually had one of our live sessions about resilient communities. And so while I'm waiting for my guest to join, today we have someone dialing in from India. As you can imagine, our alumni are very diverse and they are world. So we have these sessions twice a week, once on Tuesdays and once on Thursdays, and we try to allocate it in different times so that we can cover different time zones. But that doesn't mean... Hi, Nikhil.
Hi, Julia.
Hi, how are you? I just quickly finished the intro and then we go on with the questions. So basically, even if you miss the conversations, no worries, because we'll post them on IGTV, and we also have a dedicated channel on our playlist on our YouTube channel. So you can also watch the previous 45 sessions we had where I introduced either my fellow students from the Food Innovation Program or the Food and Climate Shapers from previous bootcamps. So it will be a very casual 30-minute conversation. We have a set of questions we will be prepared. On this way, you will also learn how Nikhil joined our ecosystem, what kind of other project he is working on, about his local food system, and how does he imagine his food future. So now, without any further ado, I encourage everyone to post questions in the chat. I will make sure that we will answer them. And now, Nikhil, I would like to hand over the stage. Please introduce yourself. Tell us where you are dialing in from, and how did you end up on the digital bootcamp in July?
Thanks, Julia. Thanks for having me. So I'm dialing in from Hyderabad. It's in southern India. I'm guessing many people know about it. I'm sorry, what was the second part?
How did you join the bootcamp in
How did
July?
I join? Okay, okay, it's like a slightly a two-step story. So you guys had the India hosts, and both of us were on the same Facebook group, which was around future thinking. It was called Future Tense. And it's not India focused, but there are lots of Indians in it that are working on building futuristic systems and multiple things. And the India hosts were on it, and they had posted a link on it literally a day before the deadline was to end, and I sent in my application.
Very good, very good. So your connection to food and food systems is a bit different than the other participants who joined the program, because your background is more in design, and you are also a founder of a project, a company called Relief Today. So tell us a bit more about your background and your current mission with this initiative.
Sure. So by education, I'm an engineer, but I am a self-taught designer in that I picked it up on the way, and I've even led design teams in the last few years. My background sort of falls at the crux of how humans interact with technology and how design can be used to sort of solve many problems that we face on a systemic level. So yeah, that's basically where I'm from. And a few years back, now I'm getting into the Relief Today part. About 5 years back, there was a big earthquake in Nepal. 2015, there was a big earthquake in Nepal, and my sister was hiking then. So we were already, panicked for a few days, and then things started settling down. A year later, or a few months later, there were floods in Chennai. There were my father, just before retiring from the Indian Air Force, was involved in flood relief in Kashmir. So within a span of a year or two, my family and friends were very heavily affected by natural disasters. And my co-founder and I, we started talking that there should be something that can be done to sort of mitigate a lot of these problems that happen during these disasters, because communication seemed to be a really big one. And then we started discussing, and let's start investigating this. At least it seems like a potential area to solve a problem that seems important, and we're seeing more and more now. We've we have almost touched a record number of cyclones and hurricanes that have happened since in the last 100 years this year. Not to mention the pandemic and a lot of other things that are happening. So this is becoming more and more relevant in terms of disaster response and disaster relief work, and we decided to take that on earlier this year. I quit my job where I was, which was at Development Bank of Singapore. I was leading design methodologies at DBS in Hyderabad, and I started Relief Today. And this also culminated about 2 years of research where we spoke to specialists, people who had been on field. We followed the whole design process of understanding from the user's perspective. We spoke to people who were victims, locals, tourists, and we came up with a problem space from which we delved into and came up with a pre-prototype that we have now, and we are building the next phase for that.
Very interesting. So you are in the prototyping phase. What are the next steps in the near future with the project?
Sure. So this is where a technique we use called experimental loops comes into play. So we've just finished our second round of research, basically. So we did a first round of research to come up with, okay, this is the problem space we are solving for. We built a pre-prototype, just a basic version that works. And then we said, okay, we have two sets of major users here. You have the people who are affected, who we call the seekers, and people who are really impacted, who we call the providers. Providers are the people who are providing any assistance. There are aid agencies, service providers, and so on, even the government agencies. So one of the major problems that we recognized was that there is a big gap in providing information. It's not just communication, but it's actually valid information, on-ground information, as soon as possible for the providers and for the seekers, getting the information as it is happening, or getting information as soon as possible for them to avail aid as soon as possible. So that's sort of become our unofficial tagline right now. What we are être raison about how can we get people assistance. How can we get people organized assistance as fast as we can? Because assistance comes one way or the other. It takes a long time, but we've been finding that if it doesn't come early enough, and if certain other criteria aren't met, it can be devastating. And there are lots of places across the world where you can actually see that now. Haiti, the first camps that were created in 2010 because of the hurricane, that camp was initially set up for 30,000 people. Today, that camp is 300,000 people, and people are just living like that. So it can take years to decades for cities and countries to recover from disasters, and we want to sort of ensure that that doesn't happen, or try to at least help in the efforts to ensure that that doesn't happen.
And are you focusing now on India? So is it a location specific project, or because you mentioned different countries at the beginning as examples, so is this something what you will also provide in other locations?
Our solution is country independent. Basically, the only limitation right now we have is that we are working on Google Maps. So basically, our solution is a map platform where you'll be able to drop a pin to see see if there is an issue. For instance, if you have an emergency, my wife is pregnant, my father is just diabetic and he's running out of insulin, you'll be able to drop a pin to show that that's a medical emergency. On the other side, providers will be able to drop a pin saying, okay, this is a place where we're going to have a medical camp set up, there'll be a shelter here, there'll be a food drive here at this time. They'll also be able to ask for volunteers, and people naturally become more altruistic at this point. They want to volunteer more. So they will be able to do that with them as well. Oh yeah, a couple of other next steps that we're doing, apart from just this whole research and now we're building for the providers element, is the experimental loops that that I had mentioned. These are basically techniques where you design the tool in such a way that you put experiments within the launch itself. In that, the data collection is placed within the launch in a way that you're constantly seeing where you're failing or where you're doing well, where so you can quickly iterate and improve on that much further. So that's basically it. It's just experimental loops where you have very specific metrics that you're targeting based on what you intend that solution to be able to do. There are some limitations in being able to do that for a startup with very less money. So it's definitely much more effective when larger corporations with a lot of resources are able to do this. But we're doing the best we can with what we have so far. And we've got a bunch of good well-wishers who have given hours and hours of the time to actually help us with this. They've spent hours in giving us interviews, and they even follow up. Where's this? What's going on? Can we help in any other way? So that's been wonderful.
Nice. So that would be my other question as well. How can you make such a project financially viable in the sense of that you at least can cover or have enough funding for the resources you use to build a platform like this or maintain it in the future?
Sure. So honestly, the solution does not cost that much. The biggest cost is one, the developer cost. If we hire people to develop, that is one, and the hosting costs, the cloud hosting costs. Other than that, we don't really have too many costs. We might have a few more costs in travel or trying to get local information from people. That might cost us a little bit, but otherwise we don't really have as much costs. So at least I have accounted for some of that for the next year and a half. Well, actually next year now, but we will have a lot more. See, this becomes an information platform where we're gathering a lot of information. Now, we're not directly gathering customer data because we mask the customer data even for ourselves, but we will be gathering a lot of intelligence on how people behave in general. So one way we can actually we'll be able to make money is be financially sustainable is by giving that data out. Another one is we'll have a freemium model, which is what we have so far, and then we're going to build in a bunch of tools that are NGO specific or aid agency specific, which tend to be much more expensive than they should be, is what we have seen. And agencies will be able to use those solutions for a price. And that should be enough for us to have a very lean team, which can still build some interesting things. So these are 2 or 3 ways. There are a few more that we have. Long-term, one of the long-term visions we have is we should be able to become so good that we might be able to provide consulting services for aid agencies and governments to work together to minimize their losses from the data that we have gathered, from the learnings that we built. So that's another way. But and of course, by having specialists on board. But yeah, there are 3 or 4 ways. Initially, though, we are looking for grant funding to be able to do that. I've just recently applied for one with the Canadian government, but let's see where we go.
Great. I keep my fingers crossed.
Me too.
You also have another project where you used the experimentation cycles recently, and that's the hackathon project, what you started in July. We already had 3 other team members of yours featured on these sessions. So I would like to hear your story about Utangi.
Awesome. So Utangi was really special because did they mention how the name came to be?
No, actually not on the live session. So please tell.
Okay, great. So one of our team members, Adrian, she's a farmer and she's been living in India for the past 11 years, and she's wonderful. And she's been doing a lot of workshops as well, and also dealing with a lot of local farmers. Now, it just so happens Adrian's Hindi is not as good. It's slightly subpar, and she would very confidently go and speak to farmers and speak to the locals, and they would respond as well. It's just that culturally they would not correct her as often. And about 8 years into working with farmers and giving workshops and talking to people and being very confident in her knowledge of the whole thing, somebody asked her what the word Utangi meant when she was saying Utangi. What she meant was Ogana, which means, or Ogangi, which means I will grow or to grow. And so Utangi was like just a funny mistake, and we absolutely loved the story. So this has to be the name, and now we've got a big acronym for it.
Very great. Such a nice story. So tell us a bit about the progress, because after the hackathon happened, and also maybe how you implemented the experimentation cycles within your work with the team.
Sure. So we are still in the process of doing the first set of experiments. We are hoping to be able to pitch this idea to an industrial investor, hopefully in this project, who'll be able to give us our first platform. It just so happened he's been a little unavailable this month. We were hoping against hope to be able to pitch to him this month. We even visited in end of October. I even visited the farm where we wanted to actually pitch. It's a beautiful, beautiful farm. So just to give you a snapshot about the concept itself, it's basically a community kitchen which becomes a community space for the local farm workers, who are mostly women, to form collectives where they can work with outside knowledge, things with people like chefs and food designers, to build menus and semi-processed to processed food. When I say processed, I'm not talking about with really bad things like with a lot of chemicals, but they're natural techniques you can use to preserve food for longer. Things like turning them into jams or sauces and things like that. And using those to reach, to provide nutrition to the society in ways that are not as commonly available. But what we mean by that is this nutrition is not coming regularly just from the food. It's going to come very heavily from secondary consumable products. What that means is when you go and buy the pumpkin, you generally throw away the pumpkin leaves. Or when you buy ladyfingers, you don't really use the ladyfinger stalks. Or in south of India, at least, there's a vegetable that's very commonly used called drumsticks. We just call them drumsticks, moringa. They're from the moringa plant. The rest of the plant is insanely nutritious. In fact, I was anecdotally told a few years back that a friend of mine was selling moringa tablets in the US for $2 a pop, which is insane. So, and in India, most of that leftover crop is just thrown away. So all that is usable, and you can convert that into really tasty, nutritious food. And we want to be able to process that using farm women in these community spaces and sell those in the markets. And another big target for us is to be able to provide the same nutrition to places where you can service a lot more people, especially those in need. So we've been speaking to a couple of orphanages where this might be a good place to send the food, especially for orphan children, because you're getting really high nutrition for relatively lower cost, or at least market rate. As high as market rate at worst, and you'll get food that can be very easily converted into food that is nutritious and healthy for them, and hopefully kids would like as well.
Yeah, great. So if we look back at the boot camp before the whole hackathon weekend happened, and if you need to explain it to someone else who is interested or looking for an educational program, what were your main takeaways from the program? What were the activities what you think you benefited the most from?
Sure. The most fun for me was learning how intricate the food systems were. And the most fun activities I guess for some of the specialist talks, because they just blew my mind in the sense I never knew things could be so counterintuitive is how I would say it. Things like the one that stuck to me, that I had heard of this, but I never really believed it as deeply, was you shouldn't till your land, or you shouldn't till your land very deeply. And it seemed like weirdly I've already done a project on this one topic of digging too deep within the soil, but tilling your land too deeply is actually a bad thing, which I never knew about. And this was spoken by, I'm forgetting the expert's name, it was a South African expert, and yeah, and he was explaining how just gentle grazing on the surface is going to be enough for you to actually get a lot more nutrition up. And the way he explained the whole thing, which I don't remember perfectly, that was really enlightening. The other activity which I really enjoyed was actually the Saturday cooking, where we actually went and talk about different ecosystems. And just when this food systems thing had started for me, the boot camp had started for me, we were doing an internal experiment within the home if we could create international foods using Indian ingredients. So we would actually go around and search different cuisines. I think we did 13 different weeks of it with 13 different countries, looking into their cuisines, and we made a lot of really tasty stuff. Some of it didn't work, but a lot of it did, and we realized that the Indian ingredients actually lends itself a lot more than we'd give it credit for, or we'd even think about. And I remember when we spoke on the Saturday cookout, I was making Malaysian laksa, and I made it all with Indian ingredients, including making the fish stock and everything, and it was absolutely wonderful. And yeah.
These experiments are needed, I think, especially if we want consumers to go get more local and seasonal. Exactly, these experiments are needed so that they understand how to substitute ingredients that are not grown in their environment and need to travel thousands of miles to get on their plate. So Velda, maybe you should, if it's 13 recipes you said, maybe you should publish a book, like a recipe book, where you have like these substitutes. I think it would be fun.
It might be fun, yeah. Yeah.
So this is a very great connection to the very last question I have, but I always ask from everyone. If you would have no barriers, so it can be utopistic, how would your preferred food future look like?
Well, it's a slight, I don't really know how to put it into words, but I'm going to try and give a long-winded description for this. Okay. The ideal food system, a utopian food system for me, would be one where you can harness the local powers of food availability the best and provide that across the board to anyone. So nobody should have a want, or rather a need to gain access. That access should be very easy to get for anything that is locally grown. And locally grown at the highest quality. But I mean locally grown, I don't mean it is just grown in a particular ecosystem, but also belongs to a micro ecosystem. Just recently, I heard of an experiment in Bangalore. Well, not an experiment, but a movement in Bangalore where this gentleman and a few ladies are trying to revive seeds and vegetables that are only indigenous to certain microclimates in that area. The thing is, those things thrived in those microclimates because those systems allowed for those specific vegetables to be to grow. Like, I can't think of a single vegetable other than eggplant that's purple. They had purple. They're like 20. Okay, well, I think you can think of purple potatoes, but they're like 20 other things that they were building that were purple. And that's not a common color you see in the food market. So. And they'll have shades of greens and pinks, and it was wonderful seeing what they were growing. And they were growing it not in big patches of land, but in balconies like I have. And my lemongrass plant is dead. So I would want to be able to see how we can harness local micro ecosystems the best we can to and get people access to that food. You can use techniques from all over the world, and there are a lot of people already working on cross-border. I believe the Italian pasta company is actually working on an Indian pasta as well, of making pasta with Indian. I read this somewhere, and it actually was an interesting thing I would love to try somewhere, with Indian ingredients or Indian spices. But I would like to see more of using the local ingredients that are built, that are grown, and then going international first. So techniques can be learned from everywhere, but you should be getting everything locally.
That sounds like a great future. I'm looking forward to see this happen. Nikhil, thank you so much for being here today. For those who joined us a bit later, the conversation will be posted on our IGTV, so you will be able to watch it from the beginning. And stay tuned. The next session is next Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. CET. And well, we have many more food and climate shapers to feature on these sessions, especially now with the new cohort graduating on the 20th of December. Nikhil, thank you so much again. Have a lovely day.
My pleasure. Have a good one. Bye, Julia.
Bye.